Hey, what's up, Liron here, and in this video we're going to paint this bird, and what I want to show you is how you can paint very messily and freely and still get the result you want. It's not perfect, it's not exactly what I planned for, but it is close, and I want to show you how forgiving the first wash is. So if that's something you feel stuck with or you were worried about, I think this one will really help. So let's take it to the table and get started. So I'm going to get started with the drawing stage as usually. Now I'm going to go through this rather quickly. What I'm doing is measuring the overall dimensions of the bird. I'm trying to find the relations between the width and height. And what I found was that the width is about 1.5 the height. And now, after I have this frame that I drew around these measurements, using my fingers and just trying to figure out the relations, I'm constraining within that the bird. And this gives me another point of reference to make sure that I get the overall drawing proportions correctly, so that you don't get too lost in the details that you mess up the overall structure. And one way of doing that is constraining the bird in this kind of a square shape and then putting in the details and looking at the negative shapes between the tail and lower body to the edge of that rectangle, for example. Okay, after you have that, it's so much easier to do what I'm doing right now, which is putting in the smaller details, the fur, the feathers rather, where the beak is, the eye, and all of that, the legs, the branch next to it. It's so much easier to place those in when you have a larger general structure to work with. So here it is. What I'm doing now is first wash, and as I said, the goal here is to show you how the first wash is very forgiving in a way, but also you can kind of take your time with it and play around with different elements. So what I'm doing now is kind of pre-wetting the surface. So I put in just water mix. It's fairly transparent. There isn't too much in it. And then into that, I'm starting to pour in some colors. So we have this yellow on the chest of the bird. And you see I'm starting to just dig out some yellow and put that in. Now, what pre-wetting the area does, it enables for softer edges. So you lose a bit of control in terms of the shapes, but that's good because the shapes on the bird aren't, they're not very well defined and with harsh edges. There is a lot of looseness and gradual transition when it comes to so many of the elements that I wanted to make sure that I demonstrate to you. Now, I'm making sure to mix it with the background. An important element of doing these things this way is to merge with the background whatever you can. Because what this does is it makes the first wash a little more comprehensive and conclusive and inclusive. It includes all of the different shapes of the painting, so you don't get as many harsh edges, which you will see in a future, by the way, video I'll post, which is fine. It sometimes happens. Sometimes it's an inherent part of the painting. Sometimes you want to have clearly defined edges, but in this example, not so much. Now, I'm working with the texture of the paper to bring out some texture on the branch here. I don't know exactly what I'll get when I'm doing this. I just know that I'll get some random highlights that I can use for later on. You don't have to. You can cover these up later, but I wanted to have some. Now notice how the edges of the reference have a bit of different colors to them. So the bottom right is a little warmer, left side is bottom is green, top is a little more purple or muted gray. So I'm pushing the temperature to be somewhat next to that, but it doesn't have to follow it vehemently. It's very different. Now I wanted to put in some play of warm and cool on the bird itself, so here we go, putting in some blue. After all of this warmth and yellow and some red, I'm putting in some phthalo blue here to contrast with that and build some interest, and then I'm bringing in some pyrrole scarlet. That brings the heat. Makes some areas look warmer. So now we have a lot of interest in the bird. And this is where, by the way, this painting goes, the process goes in a perfect direction that later on I wasn't able to fully preserve because I ended up muting things, overworking them a bit. But you do get to see how, if you allow yourself the time and you use a spray gun like what I'm just going to do, spray some water to keep it alive for longer. If you give yourself that time, you can rework and overwork and lift and change things in the initial wash, and it's actually a really good opportunity to do all of these
actions, because later on, once you have one layer of paint, you don't have as much freedom to pre-wet and do wet and wet, and because then you end up sometimes lifting the previous layer. Even in good papers, the second layer is never as smooth as the first one, I experience at least. You have to use much more water and paint to counteract the fact that some paint has already been soaked into the cotton paper. That's my personal experience. So, that's why I'd rather get all of these smooth transitions in this one go. Now, look at what I'm doing. I'm spraying a bit of water just to mix things up a little, break some of the hard edges that are there, which are very few. Now look at the colors. They're phthalo blue, French ultramarine, pyrrole scarlet. Here's an up-close view. You get this Indian yellow, which isn't really Indian, a bit of new gamboge, all sorts of different colors, because what I care about here is really the temperature and just getting a nice interest in different colors. I don't care about sticking to just 3 primary colors as I sometimes do. Now I'm starting to render the feathers. I'm actually really proud of how I did things at this stage. I think I did a really nice job in rendering these details in a minimalistic manner, and you'll see soon why this is a bit painful to admit, because I probably could have stopped at the end of this stage, to be honest. But in any case, so I'm putting in those feathers, following the structure I see in the reference. It's a very beautiful pattern in my opinion, and a lot of the beauty can come from having a first wash that is kind of colorful and all over the place and whimsical, but then having a second wash that ties all the shadows together with a fairly muted value. You can get some variety in it, but overall, generally speaking, this wash of shadows is going to be a little more homogeneous, a little more muted. Partially because of practical reasons. When you're starting to darken things, you need to rely, in my experience, a lot on blues and purples, and what ends up happening is the bright yellows inevitably get thrown out because you can't really use them, so you won't get that same super warm saturation. Even the dark reds start to lose a bit of their heat in a way. So yeah, that's one of the limitations of watercolor, the way you use color, in which if you use acrylics or oils or any of the opaque mediums, you can sometimes go with you can continuously preserve the saturation of a color much more easily by using it purely. Whereas with watercolor, not always. I find that to work well. So, that's just part of life. Now here there's a major part of the shadow under the belly of the bird. That's a really important one, and I want to get that to look right. I also am doing a bit of warm and cool plays. Now notice the edges of my shapes, because this is really where it gets important to, in order to convey or express the texture of the feathers, you have to notice the edges of the shapes. It's, as I mentioned, to get textures across, or to express texture, many times you don't really need to overthink things. It's relatively simple. It's all about the value, getting the value right, and also getting the edges of the shapes to look good. That's one of the main components, actually, just the edges. And it's often misunderstood. People think they need to do something in particular to get to get something to feel like the object that it is, when in fact it's sometimes much simpler than people think. But in any case, sorry, I was a bit distracted by making sure I know when the video ends so that I can stop the narration there. I know that's fine. Part of the things you need to think about when you're making the videos and not just watching them. So here you go. You see, you get these nice little textures at the edges. Again, it's always that. Same for the branch. You get these textures there. Now here, arguably, I could have just ignored this area and left it white. Now it feels too stiff, so I spray some water on it, spread it out a bit. But then to me now it starts to not make as much sense. And this is something I'll have to remedy later on by actually adding the background and doing more details. Now this area just screamed that it needed warmth, so I put in there, as you see, some red, and I think that was a really smart move, in fact. Otherwise this green, blue would have ended up being spectacularly boring, so I think that was a really smart move. Now here's the thing, the background's a little darker than many elements here, so I wanted to darken it. If I had to redo this, I may have just stopped the painting at this stage and added some highlights, and that's it. but I've already done it, so let's look at the positives here. This does help to bring out some of the highlights on the bird, some of the lighter sections perhaps. It makes them lighter. Ideally, I don't know, it's sometimes you want to really be deliberate and think about your next move, but sometimes I find that this stifles progress, so I'm happy that I went ahead and added this wash in, despite it not necessarily being the smartest decision. I do think it works. Had I gotten it a little more even, that could have helped as well, because some of it is a bit wobbly, I will admit, because I don't have the paper at an angle and I started bottom to top, which can sometimes be a mistake if the level of wetness is uneven. But in any case, learn from my mistakes. That's one of the things I could have improved here. And now you see I blended some of the edge of the branch there just because it's more in the background, as you can see in the reference photo. So now I'm cleaning the brush, drying it, and I'm starting to use some opaque paint here and there just to bring back some of the light. In many areas, it's just a very small touch. You notice how I'm going over the red that was there. That could have been left there, I think. It would still look good. But in any case, in many places, it's just a small touch. It can help bring out a texture, hopefully, as you can see now. But it's nothing too... too crucial. I'm just trying to look at a reference photo and figuring out where things could be a little lighter and how I can use that to, if I'm already doing that, to bring out the texture. You see, I hope that makes sense. And I actually think this will be wrapped up really soon. These are really the final stages, and I hope to soon also remove the tape and show you the end result signed. So yeah, overall, I'm really pleased with this. Added some highlight on the branch, added a bit of a shadow to justify that. Adding some dark touches just to separate some of the shapes I see there. This kind of a thing can help if the shapes are unclear, which I believe they are a little unclear here. Just to, on a macro level, when you look at this from afar, to have it make a little more sense. This is why these cleaner separations can help. And also it pushes the temperature, so you get both warm and cool down, for example, on the belly of the bird. So it can be utilized for many things. But in any case, now I want to give you an up-close look of the painting, hopefully in a bit of a better quality than the video. And with that, we can wrap it up.
So this is it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I would really appreciate it if you drop a like and a comment below. It really helps me reach new people, and subscribe if you aren't already. If you want to learn how to get over the stifleness and paint more freely and more loosely, be sure to check out my frustration-free watercolor course. As always, link in the description box below. I've been getting a lot of positive feedback on how it helps people, just let go and really enjoy the creation process, and from that a lot of competence can emerge, because sometimes you're just so stifled you can't get to the next level of actually improving your skills. So with that, we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next vid real soon.